Okay, a call to order the special meeting of the Ojai Historic Preservation Commission, Thursday, April 23rd, 2015. First, we'll start with the Pledge of Allegiance. So, Rick, would you like to lead us in the pledge?
Okay. Everyone, please rise. I pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, roll call.
Okay, I always say your name wrong. I'm sorry.
It's okay.
Brian.
Commissioner Roney.
Commissioner Roney,
Yes,
thank you.
Roney, correct. Yeah.
Commissioner Hill.
Here.
Commissioner Walker.
Here.
Commissioner Basaccia.
Here.
And Museum Representative Lewis.
Here.
Thanks.
Okay, this is our public comment time. All comments should be limited to 3 minutes. Speakers, unless extended by the chair. All comments should be, speakers should state their name and address for the record and direct their comments to the chair, not the audience or the press. All right, do we have anybody from the public who would like? Yes.
Christine Golden, and I'm a resident, live on Daly Road. I'm also here representing the Public Art Committee of the Arts Commission. First of all, thank you for letting us come and talk to you tonight. You may or may not have heard that the Arts Commission is in the very, very, very early stages, really exploratory stages of considering whether or not it would be appropriate and a good idea to do something along the wall of the Ojai Playhouse. And we wanted to come before the Historic Preservation Committee for several reasons. And one of those was to give you some of the background that we have on that building. It's come to my attention that the commission, your commission, is interested in that building as a historical preservation site. So we want to come before you, we want to tell you what we know, we want to tell you how we would go about even thinking about doing this, because this is all in a very cerebral place at this time. And then when we're done, we would really love to hear from you, any suggestions, any questions. I'm gonna ask Roger Conrad, my colleague on the commission and on the committee, the Public Art Committee, to come up, and he's going to do a little presentation on the history of that building. And I know some of you probably know everything that already is up there because of the role you play. But then all of us will have the same background once Roger is done. So if it's okay, can I call Roger up? Okay, thank you.
I'm Roger Conrad with the Arts Commission, and I live at 11,400 Sulphur Mountain Road, Ojai. And what I'm going to do is hand out some images that I got at the museum. I also work at the museum, too. These are for you to keep.
Thanks, Roger.
Thank you.
The museum has recently done a show on the theater, which you might have gotten a chance to look at and come visit us at the museum. What I'm going to do is just give a little history of each of these pictures on here. And so the first one was a postcard that was distributed in 1916. And the building was designed and built by John J. Burke, a businessman that was very prominent for many years in Ojai. And the building was built in 1914 and had the name Isis Theater. And there were Isis theaters actually all over the country. It would be an unfortunate name now, but anyway, it was a time when theaters like the Egyptian and the Grauman's Chinese that people wanted to go. And of course, Isis is a Egyptian princess, so that was supposed to make it seem more fancy and exotic. So the next picture is 1920. And if you notice there's all of a sudden a cantilevered canopy across the front of the building. And this is the first time that the iconic edifice was done with the little hollow piece in the center and the glass tiles on the edge of it there. And then if we go to the 1950 picture, this is the way the theater was seen, and it was a renovation that probably dates back to about 1935. And you can see this was really a major change with the ticket booth that was out front, very classic of that particular period of motion picture theaters. We go now to 1953, and there was another renovation in 1952 that this picture depicts. And you'll see the canopy over that, and it actually had electric light bulbs in it. And you can see this, I use this for the night picture from that time on. And then the next picture is from 1954, which was another postcard that was sent out. And this shows the iconic Ojai sign that was there, which was one of the first things that actually let people know this was Ojai at that particular time. And then if you move over to the next picture from 1978, Wayne Glasgow leased and renovated the theater in 1966. And he was quite notorious for many things and was very well known and had the theater until 1983. But he went and changed the marquee, and he also renamed it Glasgow Playhouse. And it was decorated in a Scottish motif. And you can't make it out too well in the black and white photo, but there was a tartan up there, and his wife collected things from Scotland and brought it into the theater. And if you also notice there, it says join the mural majority, not the... And there was actually a city council meeting sometime in '78 where we were looking at the possibility of putting a mural up at that time. So it's not a new idea, and we realize it's been controversial. In 2014, you can see the picture where the theater is now closed due to the July 20th flood that basically decimated the foundation of the theater. And then in the picture to the right of that is Waleed and Cheryl and Khalid Alawar. And in the back you can see the theater, and you can see it pretty much the way it is right now. There's kind of an interesting aspect of that wall, which is on Signal Street. If you look at the first picture at the far left, you'll notice some that appear to be windows in the upper part of it. And you'll actually see those again in this picture. And this was something the contractors actually came to us and asked if we had pictures of it, because they were trying to figure out what was going on. And so we established through David Mason that those were actually vents in 1914 because they didn't have air conditioning at that time. And you'd close up the theater, and so you need to have some sort of ventilation. So that was happening. But this particular area is one of the most outstanding places in Ojai, and that's why we're thinking of doing some kind of art project on that. And we haven't chosen an artist, and we haven't chosen a particular motif, but it's quite a large area, and as far as we know, it's never been developed for anything other than just the blank wall that it has. So we feel as the Art Commission that this is kind of something waiting to happen. You've probably all been to Santa Paula and seen a lot of the murals that they've done there very tastefully in some of the side streets and things of that nature there. We've also gotten permission from the Alawars to actually do something on that. We've also looked into some possible ways to finance this. But what we want to do is get your support, because we have heard that it has been controversial in the past, and we also want comment from the public too. And so one of the things that we'd like to see is a discussion. I know you can't really talk about it now, but we would like to see it get on the agenda in the future. So I'll turn it back to Christine.
Thank you, Roger. So we're just going to give you a couple more little things that we know that are going on with this, and then we'll open it up. Oh, can you talk about it tonight, or do we have to come back?
I'll speak to that. Because it wasn't on the agenda as a discussion item, we couldn't really discuss it much, but it certainly could be added to a future agenda.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Okay, so let me just give you then a couple, a little pieces of information, background.
Excuse me.
Yeah.
Oh, what was that last comment of yours?
It couldn't be discussed much tonight. A comment or two would be
Okay.
no more than that, and
Could
no decision overall.
Right.
And then, but it could be agendized for a future item.
Thank you.
All right. So just a couple other things to keep in mind when you're thinking about this, or when you're asking us or giving us feedback. Why are we here? Because it's not a historic preservation building. But there are people who think it should be. I mean, it's one of the oldest structures in Ojai, and it just has that Ojai feel to it. So why are we coming before you? Because we want to proceed and have the Historic Commission as our allies. We want your input and we want your help. If we are indeed going to do something, our first concern is that it fits in with the character of Ojai, that it isn't some, well, I'm going to use the word garish, that it isn't some kind of garish mural that's been slapped up there just to say, well, now we have an art mural up there on the wall. I will tell you that when I spoke to Khaled, he told me that he was in favor of something going up on that wall, and that he'd been already approached by RTK Tiles. Now, I don't know if this is still going on, if this is still the case, because this was a month or so ago when I spoke with him, that apparently RTK Tiles, they are going to put some tile work on the two pillars that flank the double doors on the Ojai Avenue side of the building. There are going to be some RTK decorative tiles there, apparently. I assume that's been approved, and that's okay for them to do. And then they went forward and asked Colette if he would be interested in them doing some kind of tile work on the side of the building, which, of course, he can't give them permission to do that. So let's talk a little bit about what I know as Public Arts Committee Chair, what the process might be if we go forward, if we feel, yes, we need to go forward with this. First of all, the commission would employ the services of an art consultant, and that art consultant would handle details that would include calling for proposals. And those proposals would be based on input that we would give the art consultant as the Arts Commission, and hopefully that the Historical Commission would give some input as well. This is what we really would like to see for the city on this. It should be something in keeping with what that corner looks like. Then the request for proposals would come back to a public jury, which would be made up of commission members, hopefully somebody from the Historic Commission, Khaled, public at large, as well as public with art background. So there would be a public jury. This is the way art projects have been handled in the past when they were put forward by the city. And it's possible that we would look at requests for proposals and choose none of them and say nothing, no, doesn't work. Or it may be that something would come before us and we'd all go, you know what, this is beautiful. This would really be wonderful to do, and then we would move forward with that. The art consultant would handle all the phases of the installation, the contract with the city, da-da-da. Now, having said all that, I'm going to just back up completely again and say, probably before we go forward, we also will have to look and see whether or not a mural ordinance is needed, because right now Ojai does not have a mural ordinance. We have the public art ordinance, which spells out how a public jury works and what its tasks are, but we don't have a mural ordinance, and indeed we may need to have one simply for precedent, for the idea that others might then want to come forward and slap something up on the side of a building. So, having said all that, we're here because we want to be very respectful that this corner is so prominent in Ojai, and that anything is done to the side of that building is going to make a statement about the city. And we want you to know that we're very sensitive to that, very respectful of that, and very aware of that. Also, a little more background. About 5 or 6 years ago, a committee was formed by Steve Grimmett to look at putting a mural on the side of that wall. And that Roger was on that committee, I was on that committee, Linda Harmon, Kathy Hartley, who at the time was the owner of Ojai Playhouse, was on that committee, and we were looking at a way to go forward. So there's been interest to do something. A lot of people who have referred to the way that blank brick wall looks as an eyesore. Now, having said that, since I've been working on this, I've heard opinions on both sides. I've heard, don't touch it, it shouldn't have anything on it, it will really like ruin the way Ojai feels, to when are you going to do it because I want to throw some money at it. So it's, you know, we have opinions on both sides of the spectrum out there. And what we want to do, Roger and I now, is to hear, just get some feedback from you as much as is allowed tonight with it not being on your agenda. So.
Can I ask Can I
Commissioner
ask a
Basaccia.
question? Thank you. Of maybe Kathleen Wald. Christine said that that there is no mural ordinance. Is there anything keeping anyone from putting a mural on the side of that? Planning Commission or anybody?
Murals are exempt from the sign ordinance, you know, so they specifically allow art and mural to not be considered signs. But under the city's design review permit, changing the alteration of an exterior of a commercial building requires design review permit. We don't even allow people to change colors of their building on the exterior without a design review permit or a director's exemption. It was our understanding, in working with Carrie Miller, who came here before and gave a presentation to you before, that he had a clear understanding that this is a repair and maintenance project and no changes to the playhouse would be allowed without coming back through for a design review permit. That's why he was really clear when he presented to you that they were just, you know, going to re-stucco, that they may change like maybe subtle texture to the stucco, but if you remember his presentation, he didn't talk about any changes to the facade, except for, I think the only thing he mentioned was possibly not painting back the tricolor. I think there were 3 colors on that, and there was kind of a gradient color. And so we've been very clear with them that it's one thing to do repair and maintenance because, you know, it's clearly wasn't their fault what happened. And then to make substantial changes or changes to the appearance of the exterior would require a permit. And Matt might have something to add to that.
Just to add to that, and that's that DRP hook that Kathy's referring to is for a property in the C1, the VMU, or one more commercial zone.
B, wasn't it? B something?
Business professional, and this is in the C1, so it would pick up that. The other point, on the broader point about a mural ordinance, the benefit to a mural ordinance is that it allows there to be a review specifically for a mural, independent of other exterior structural changes, and that likely would be routed through the Public Art Commission rather than the Planning Commission, recognizing the Public Art Commission's particular focus on art aspects, whereas the Planning Commission is focusing on design and land use permits. And the other benefit to a mural ordinance is that it makes it clear that murals can only be put up that are appropriate for the character of the city. But of course, at present, we don't have a mural ordinance. Those are the benefits to doing one. Whether one is done or not is up to the council.
I was just curious in general about it.
I think in general, we know that the design review in the appropriate situation does regulate the exterior appearance of buildings.
Okay, thank you.
May I just add in here that our thought is not to have something ready to go while the building is still being reconstructed, but this would be something that would happen after the fact. It would be something that would be added to. Now, I've talked to one art consultant who said, wouldn't it be great if we already knew if we were going to do something, what it was, because the studs are showing. And it would be great to, you know, but Carrie, and I've spoken to Carrie as well, Carrie certainly will not forget where those studs are. So we feel that all of that would be in place. But the wall would be stuccoed according to whatever is being permitted by the city. And then this would be something that would sit atop of that structure. And again, if anything, because if we didn't receive a proposal that was amenable to Ojai, we would simply say, no, thank you.
Commissioner Roning?
A quick question. So I know this is in the rough works, the idea.
Very much.
Do we have any idea how big this would be? Would it cut the surface in
No.
height and length at all?
No.
No, just so it's just,
No, I think in my, as chair of this committee, one of the things that I would be asking for the art consultant to do would be to poll the public art jury and members of this commission and the whole body of the Arts Commission as to getting an idea of what would maybe work. Is it going to be this? Let's say it's tile work. I mean, you could have tile work that just would be in the four corners, and then maybe something smaller in the middle, something like that, very similar to what you see over at the gas station or on the Oaks. That's a possibility. That almost comes into the area of decorative art more than what some of us on the Arts Commission would think of as public art. Some of us have dreams that it would really be public art. But we recognize and we respect that that particular corner probably is going to call for something a little more staid, a little more, back off the innovation in that place. But it's not the decision of any one person. It would be the committee who would review those proposals and see if there's anything that, does that help at all?
absolutely.
Okay.
Thank you.
Terry, did you have?
Yes, I'd like to point out, I'm not sure if this is known by the Arts Commission, that building is on the list of historic sites of merit in the city. So it would come under our surveillance to also have a big comment on that item. And I also had a couple of questions. Was Elise DePoit contacted in regard to this? Because she wrote a history on this building, and
Yes,
no one's mentioned this.
yes, Fountains and Sculptures of Ojai, is that the book you're talking about?
And she'd worked on that, plus the exhibit. She prepared a lot of work for that, because I did a lot. I spent maybe about 4 or 5 months with her every couple of days working on the research on the Swansons and all the historical background for this theater. And so she'd be a prime source if you're looking for information.
I have that book sitting on my coffee table. I
I'm not
love
talking-
that book.
I
love that book.
You're misunderstanding me. I'm not talking about that book. I'm talking about the research she did on the history of the Ojai Playhouse. And there's two separate things.
Okay,
One is about the art in Ojai at the various fountains and so on. That's the book you have. That's been published.
thank you, because I will
But this
contact
is
her.
a big
Yes,
source of information for you.
great.
And I would just like to add that, as you know, Ojai's downtown historic buildings are very sensitive for us on the commission, and for us, they are public works of art just in and of themselves, and so we are very concerned about anything that might detract from that history. But with that said, we're always open and would encourage you to move forward with whatever plans to bring to us, although we will be critical, I think, have a critical eye on it.
Good, good. We want that. And I really want to thank you, Terry, for alerting me to call Elise, because I know that she's just a wealth of knowledge, and I will follow up on that, too.
Okay, also, a number of us have been to visit all the murals in Santa Paula, and I presume that they have a mural ordinance, because all of the murals that they have are done very tastefully and are very well thought of by the community. And so I'm sure that at their museum, they have somebody that would be in charge of the body of work on the murals in Santa Paula. And that
Great
perhaps
idea.
could give you, they could help you with the ordinance. Perhaps they could help you with the various artists that are involved, but they're great.
Fabulous idea. Thank you.
Can I ask another question?
Sure.
And that this could be for anybody really, but does the HPC doesn't have any vote in this matter? It would only be like some kind of advisory thing. Is that correct?
I'm not sure.
Yeah, that would be correct. I mean,
Okay.
the regulations provide you to be the authority on work permits, and that is once it's declared a landmark by the city council, and this has
Right.
not been. Usually what we would do is when something, if, say this for instance was, so it needs a DRP if you're going to change the exterior of a building, and that would go to planning commission, we would recommend that they first forward it to you for comment as courtesy, anything that is historic or has historic value to it. And I think they've always been really cooperative in doing that. So of course they would get your input. And I think that we know how that's always worked well in the past. So I think we would ask them to do that. The fact that it's on the site of merits is really valuable when we're doing things that have to do with CEQA or the historic nature of a building. In this case, they would be, since it isn't landmarked, changing if it were landmarked, I would say this, then it would come to you for a work permit. Definitely. But since it's not, unless Matt has something else to answer, I think that's pretty much it in a nutshell.
Okay, thanks. That makes sense.
And we would want someone from the commission to be on our public art jury for sure for this particular project. We would hope that one of you would be a member.
Right, because it will affect the other the landmarks that are down there. I mean, it will affect the arcade.
Yes.
It will affect the post office. And so I think it would be important to get this before the commission and have the involvement of the commission, even if technically in the law there's no need for a vote of ours up or down on it. I think as advisors to the city about how to handle and preserve these great buildings of ours, that it would be good.
Well, I would offer to you, I'm sorry, Matt, do you need to go ahead?
I was going to point out that might well be accomplished when the council approves the funding for the project, because I assume the money will come from the city in the end.
Well, we have a public art fund, and there are certain parameters that we can and cannot spend those funds on, and this would fall under something that is allowed to be spent. But anything we do goes to city council for approval.
And the council could certainly run it by this commission, and that would be a way to bring it before the commission without being a work permit required project.
There's the other way, and that's if we landmark the building.
Correct. I would also offer too that with a work permit, we're obligated under CEQA to perform environmental analysis. And of course, since it is recognized through the survey as having some historic value, I would have to look at the survey. I'm just assuming that it's a category 1, probably. Is that what it is?
I can't.
And so I would look at that, but then we would ask them to do a historic report, an evaluation to make sure that what they're proposing, because it's open-ended, does not damage what would be a character-defining element. Yeah. So that always goes without being, goes with, that's going to take place. I mean, a mural probably wouldn't, but I don't know what they're proposing. And so obviously that's where you're saying the conflict ends up, is that if it's something that then detracts from the overall character defining of a historic building, then that would then trigger some kind of CEQA analysis of it. Because just like it did with the NEF or any of those, all that analysis that was done in there. So again, it would be done again here.
And also that area, I believe, between Fox Street and Ventura Street is a theme area. It's in this code, so I think that would need to be considered too. So.
Yeah, and just to underscore that our art ordinance actually specifies that any public art project has to complement and go with wherever it is being installed and done. It's got to, that's part of what the Arts Commission looks at, and one of the reasons we're interested in being the force behind this is because we have all those things in place, where a citizens group doesn't necessarily have that. So by our doing it, we know what exactly the pitfalls are and what to look for, and to be respectful of that space and of the surrounding spaces, the post office, all of it. absolutely.
All right, well, thank you.
Yeah, well, thank you for listening. And I'm going away with great information and ideas, so I really appreciate it. Well worth our time.
Is there 3 minutes up?
Thank you.
Thank you.
We're down to the consent items, and I'm a little unsure. They're listed as consent items. Does that mean if someone on the commission wants to talk about or correct any one of them, they need to ask to pull it out of the consent group? So these will be voted on as a whole unless any of the commissioners would like to pull one of them for separate discussion if you found some errors or changes you'd like to make.
You know, it's not really worth getting into. There's a few grammatical errors, but we're talking about consent items, meaning the minutes.
The 3 minutes.
Yeah.
I would just like to say I appreciated the detail that
Yeah.
they went into on the meeting of the 22nd.
Well, I guess I should explain that a little bit because that was my doing, and I think I was kind of controversial, but I wanted to make sure that as time goes on and, you know, people pull it back, that it's not just action minutes where somebody has to go back and watch the tape, that actually it's really clear about what went on. And so I know I made Sherry, unfortunately, that's why it took a long time, because I said, as far as enough is concerned, that was so controversial, I'd really like to have it pretty much verbatim so that it's there and you guys can use it as a tool when needed or reference it. It's always very hard sometimes to go back and look at the tape. So that was only the one item I did that, and it's kind of unusual, but it was an unusual situation.
Give her our appreciation, because I think it was
Thank you.
a critical meeting. There was a lot of important things said, and
Do you happen to have, when you play your recordings, is there a device that you can, on your computer, that when you play that it can print this out, or does somebody have to listen?
There's a program. Sherry looked into it because actually it did take her quite a while. And staff just really isn't trained to do them. They really paraphrase minutes quite often. That's why we have you review them so carefully. There is a program. It's kind of like a legal court reporter. You know, you do have to do some cleanup, but it does do that. But the city isn't interested in doing verbatim minutes. I just asked for this particular item to be done that way because it was really kind of historic in what went on, and I wanted it to be very clear and when people reference it back. So I know we're going to be using it a lot for how we go forward in changing our ordinance and what issues we saw were a problem. And, you know, it was so highly debated or controversial at the time, people might not remember what was said or what was not said. So I just thought it was kind of important in this one because we are going to use it, I think, as kind of a model for how we change our ordinance. Mm-hmm. But we're not going to be doing verbatim minutes for anything. I mean, unless we decide to have another extremely highly controversial item.
yeah, usually it's not so necessary. But do we have a motion to approve all three?
I move that we approve these 3 consent items.
I would second.
Do we need a roll call?
No, I don't think, do they need to roll call that?
No.
No.
All in favor?
Aye.
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 Opposed? Motion carries. Disclosure of site visits and ex parte contacts. Anybody have anything to report? That's something that's on the agenda tonight. I just have one. I don't know if it even counts, but I contacted the city of Ventura and the county of Ventura about their fee schedules, and I wrote down what I have gotten from them, so I thought I would distribute that when we have that discussion. Public hearing items. Number 4, staff report.
Okay, so before you tonight, you have a request for continuation of the only one and only public hearing item you have for you tonight, which was a sign for Julie Jackson Fine Art. As you know, there are specific guidelines for how these signs are to be placed in the arcade, and this sign did not meet those criteria, so staff was pretty much ready to take this forward denial, and we contacted the applicant, and she requested a specific continuation so that she could modify her sign, and staff concurs with that recommendation. So we ask that you continue sign permit S15-08 to the May 14th.
Good.
Typo, 2015. I'm not, that's way too far in advance. HPC meeting to allow the applicant to resubmit an application that is consistent with the arcade design guidelines.
Okay, so we don't have to do any other action on that?
I would just like to ask the question for you, Kathleen. Was the applicant then, you advised her that they probably wouldn't pass muster and that they were too far afield from our, what we would like. Was she given a guidelines to go by then to make our project fit
I
into
think
the guideline?
they're always given the guidelines up front. People are always, I think, kind of pushing the guidelines. Yes, specifically, we were directed that to her that the sign was too tall and it was white or off-white, and that in keeping with those others that are in the arcade, they are mostly dark. And so I think anybody can walk down the arcade and see genuinely what everything looks like. And of course, I think business owners always want their sign to stand out,
Right.
so they don't really want to be like everyone else. It's kind of counterintuitive. But yes, and so we are working with her.
Because in the guidelines, it does designate that the background, description of the background colors in the guidelines.
You're right, it's very clear.
Yeah, okay.
It's very clear. And that's why staff didn't have a problem bringing it for denial, because the guidelines are very clear. And, we will support, the HPC's guidelines when we're asked to enforce them. So that's why the staff part was proposed the way it was.
Okay, item number,
I would like you to, yeah, sorry, go ahead.
I was
Matt.
going to say, I would recommend continuing it to May 14th, 2015.
May 14th?
This date right here.
Yeah, May 14th, 2015. And I'm doing that on the record.
Motion that?
I've just been informed that the plan is to move the May 14th meeting to May 28th. So,
28th?
May 28th rather than May 14th.
2015?
Yeah, 2015, not 2105. And again, a vote isn't needed to continue it, but it needs to be a clear statement by the chair that it's continued to that date.
Okay, so we'll continue this item until the meeting of May 28th, 2015.
That's sufficient, and that'll be a special meeting.
Okay.
I planned my entire vacation around that meeting like 2 months ago,
Oh, good.
but it'll work out.
Yeah, I was just informed.
So
Well,
I could be at that meeting.
I was just going to say this, and, I know I'm kind of, Chair, if I might just since the discussion's on the floor. We have some staff that hasn't taken vacation in a really long time that's going to be gone, and as you know, we're just as tight as we can be when everyone's here. So our thought was, if you would be so kind as to consider moving it, that then we would make sure, because based on the fact that there's City Council and Planning Commission and City Council and Planning Commission and BABS and then HBC, there really isn't a week that staff isn't either preparing an agenda or going to a meeting. And we felt like if by just moving it, it would allow us to not have to have temporary staff come in and prepare your agenda. That's just the reason we're doing it. If it's inconvenient, then we'll make do with some other way. But that was the thought behind asking it to be moved off the 14th.
No, I'm happy about it,
Okay.
actually.
Is that something you like us to do now?
Do you want him to do that? It kind of came, it's not agendized, it kind of came up at the last minute when we were going through what would be the best way to handle shortages of staff.
Right. It wouldn't require a formal action by the commission. It's just staff will agendize it, will issue the notices, and then put out an agenda for that meeting. But it would be good to get confirmation from folks that they can
So
attend.
you'll cancel the normal meeting and then have a special meeting on the 28th?
Yep.
Does that fit with everyone?
That works.
Okay.
Cool.
And will you let the others who aren't here know they'll, well in advance? Okay, we're on item number 5, proposed changes to the fee schedule for fiscal year 2014 associated with historic preservation. Staff report?
Okay, I would just like to note that I brought this item before you back in December 2014, but it was never discussed. And so all the materials in here are from the previous meeting, and I'm glad to go over it, but I would just like to add kind of an addendum to them, which is the historic fees were never changed in the 2014-2015 fiscal year because council wanted to afford the HPC the opportunity to comment on them. So, as I understand, they were still standing as they were before. We are at this point in April, concluding April, we will have a new budget year coming up. Fees, master fees, and the master fee schedule are looked at with every budget year if they need to be adjusted. As you know, so even though this report says 2014, 2015, which was what the direction was from council, obviously we're concluding that period, so we would just ask that you adjust this report to reflect that we would probably be making this recommendation for the 2015, 2016 fiscal year. We'd like to just explain that generally speaking, what was done when fees are looked at, it comes in, the city's finance director looks at them for total cost recovery. Cities and agencies are not allowed to make a profit. We are allowed to recover costs. And so the general project in and of itself was to look at all fees, not just HPC, but building, planning, public works, and to ask staff, how much time do you spend doing something? Multiply that by what generally the staff makes per hour, whether it's contract, fully loaded, benefits, et cetera, what it really costs in overhead, what it really costs for the city to process something. That's what staff did when these fees were developed. We just looked at the strict task that was before us. What does it cost for you to do something? What wasn't really explored via the financial end of this was what fees, what are the unintended consequences from having fees that recoup costs? Are you recouping forward costs only to incur costs, at the end because maybe people don't come in and get permits and maybe there's a lot of illegal activity, all those other things? Or the social benefits from what does the public really gain from having fees that are reduced? What is the social benefit? So with that said, I think what they're asking you to look at is not what we said is what it costs us to do something, but to really look at to give recommendations on what you think benefit is achieved by either lowering those. Of course, you can't make them higher because that you cannot do. You cannot charge more than the cost. And so I wanted to just explain that that all fees were looked at for just a basically a mathematical equation to get total cost recovery. And then what I think your task with tonight really is to talk about, when the fees are appropriate and make a recommendation for reduction of those fees based on whatever you think is appropriate, social benefit and so I'd kind of open that up to you then. And so I just wanted to provide that. In the packet, there's the packet that went to City Council, the minutes in there. I try to be thorough with this to kind of give you what was said and how why it was referred back to you for your information, and then what the fee was proposed as. And with that, I'm open to any questions if you have questions regarding the fees.
Yes, Commissioner Hill?
Yes, I just have a comment in passing. And this last week or week before, the 3 of the commissioners were in attendance at the Historic Preservation Commission meeting that was handled here in Ojai. It was the state group that came in and gave us a a wonderful a day. And commissioners, historic preservation commissioners from Salinas all the way down in towards Laguna, they all came to this thing. And it was a big group, and they touched on this business of fees. And when what you just mentioned, the fact that our fees that are proposed based on recovery costs, are those the best way to go? Because there's public benefits from not doing that, or at least partially not doing that. And also, our subcommittee of myself, Craig, and Rose Boggs, we've been meeting and we've been touching on these issues also, along with our attorney. And so I wonder, are you asking tonight for us to come up with a firm number, or is this just a discussion type of situation?
Okay, so the way I see it is, the city council wants your input. That's what
Right.
you were directed to do. Given all of the changes in staff back and forth and the changes in priorities with the NEF and things like that, we know that this kind of got waylaid. I think that although they're anticipating this coming back in, I believe, May to city council, that, like I said, basically this year is kind of a loss. You know, it's just gone. We're not charging these fees, you know, you know, so I don't think that there's necessarily a hurry if you want to be more thorough. That's my point. My point is, you know, if you got back to them in May, there would be 1 month, you know, left in the fiscal year. So I think that what I would like to see you do is I think that you should come up with some direction for staff. I think that what I heard, I attended the training too, and what I got out of it, I think was really beneficial was, you know, maybe having the fees for the Mills Act, having fees for maintenance. We talked about that. And that if you've got some things there for Ventura, then I would recommend that you give those to me and that we put together a packet with some direction of what you want me to do and put it back out so the public has access to that. You all have the same information, and then you can make recommendations and finalize it. Like I said, we do this every year with the fees, and so I think that I don't see a problem with going to the next fiscal year. I do think that one of the things, and I just would offer this as, I've been working with these fees now for a while, and I want to make it very clear. There is some misunderstanding with the fees here in Ojai. Generally, it's kind of labeled wrong. What they really are is we charge the applicant for processing expenses, and we take in a deposit and we debit off those expenses. Anything we don't use, we give back to the public. So when it says something, $2,000, $2,500, that is a deposit. If we don't incur expenses that meet that money, we give it back. So there's a lot of, it gives the wrong impression to always call it a fee, because a fee sounds like you pay something and you don't get anything back. It really, in most instances, in most of these things, and the way that the fees have been done generally is anything under $500 is a fee, non-refundable. Anything over $500 is a deposit, and we keep what we call trust funds, and those trust funds go in. It's like functions like an escrow account. The applicant puts it into the trust fund, and then we take off all the expenses, mailing notices, lawyer fees, staff fees, et cetera, and overhead, and we debit those out. So that's how it works. And so it's always going to be that something that is smaller and simpler, by just the nature of the amount of time it takes, will incur less expenses than something that's bigger. So the idea is to look at the deposit and make sure that the actual deposit isn't so large that it dissuades people from coming in. Because ultimately, the more, if someone comes in with a really good landmark process, historic report, everything done right, it's going to go through really quickly. So, it's those things that we have to work with and continually work on that then cause the problem. So keep in mind that that whether or not you take it all the way down to no deposit and the city is functioning, covering all the expenses itself through general fund, or whether you just want to have a deposit at a smaller amount, and then, so it's not an impediment or a hurdle to somebody coming in. Then I think the other thing would be to, tell me again what other fees that you've, I was unaware that you could do a Mills Act maintenance fee, and so, there are fees that probably aren't listed in here that we probably do need to add. And I think that's where I need direction, so I can bring it back, If you want me to look at additional cities, I'm happy to do that.
Okay, would this be a good time to pass out what I got from the city of Ventura and the county of Ventura? I talked with Nicole Donor from the county, and she said for historic landmark designation, there's no charge, which has been our policy for quite a number of years. Mills Act contract is $610 deposit, and I asked her, well, what does that typically? And she said typically it was $2,500 to $3,000 was what they'd wind up paying, depending on how complicated it was. But they asked for the $610 deposit when the application comes in. A certificate of appropriateness is $235. A certificate of review, which I'm not sure what that is $85. And the plaques for them are at owner's expense because there's no requirement for a plaque for the county. They just designate the building. If the owner wants a plaque, they have to pay for it. I did contact San Buenaventura Research to ask them about their fees, and they said, typically they're around $2,500 to do a report, although sometimes more. So that's something that might have to be figured in if, for example, we wanted a fee structure where if the city nominated a building that the city might pay for that report. So that would be a factor that we'd want to know about. For the city of Ventura, the historic landmark designation is $400. Mills Act is $2,027. I don't know where the 27 goes, but historic resource assessment. And I didn't quite understand what that meant because it was $844 plus a consultant for phase 1 and the same amount plus consultant for phase 2. I'm not sure what's covered.
So they're adding $844 is what they consider staff time to review it.
To review a historic resource assessment, like if somebody wanted to do a landmark, they would charge the $400 for the landmark application and then a review charge. That's what that would be. Okay. And then they had a design review for historic structure, $1,000. I don't know if that's the equivalent of our work permit or what
That's what I would think.
Sounds like it.
that involves. And then they didn't have anything listed for plaques, so I'm not sure if they have the same policy as the county or what. I did note in our historic preservation ordinance under section 4.814 that it says the necessary and reasonable expenses for the operation of the Historic Preservation Commission shall be the responsibility of the city. Included shall be the installation and maintenance of markers. So I would hope, just from my own point of view, that this is a public benefit. The total amount, since we landmark maybe one building a year, if even that, is not significant really in the overall picture of things. And I think too that we want to try to incentivize people to work with us, and if the fees are low or non-existent or reasonable. We did talk about that question of if the city nominates a building for a landmark, whether or not the fees should be borne by the city. because they're nominating somebody's building that they own, and then to expect them to pay.
On that point, if we nominate this, someone's building for landmarking, we couldn't require them to pay the fee.
And also, there was another instance in the code where it says that anybody in the public can nominate a building. So it didn't seem quite right that if some historic group like the museum nominated a house, that somehow the landowner could be made to pay a fee, or even the historic report. So it would seem like maybe the person who nominates
Yeah, the applicant
building
would bear the fee cost.
should have to bear those costs, whether it be the city or the property owner or some other person. So,
I do agree with what you're saying. I was kind of under the impression that, maybe from prior conversations we've had, that the direction we were going to go with this was that landmarking, we were wanting it to be still the way it had been before, but Mills Act was where we wanted to not, if you're applying for Mills Act, that's where the fees would kick in. And I guess I need some feedback on that, but that's where I was thinking before, that generally we wanted to explain to the city council that adding unnecessary fees to landmarking makes it difficult and then results that it's an impediment, because the costs, as you pointed out here, there's always going to be this cost to the applicant of the historic report, and that in and of itself is substantial enough to make it dissuade some people, but then adding costs on top of that from city processing, that's how I thought we were looking. So we were looking, what I thought, more on addressing the issues with Mills Act and work permits, because obviously the work permit, we need to kind of maybe suggest a two-layer system, like a minor work permit and a major work permit. And maybe the minor stuff, like fencing and colors and things of that nature, we would let go without a fee. But if it was substantial, i.e. changing the exterior or actual physical construction of the building, that's when we would want to have a fee. I would assume that's what we needed to talk about. But if you're not in agreement on the plaques in and of itself, it should be noted, it says fee waived for landmark designation requests. That's always been there. So we don't charge anybody that's landmarking. I think the point is, mood is on plaques. We want plaques. City's always been paying for those. We don't really need to make a change. So I would assume you'd want me to come back and say that's historic the way it's always been. We want to keep it that way. And then moving on to a historic district, we never had a historic district. We've never had anybody come in. That is going to be a lot of work, because we're dealing, the issue with a historic district is that there's a voting that takes place, and, you're dealing with a lot of homeowners and a lot of people. I mean, the amount of work that's going to take for staff, and the amount of time, and coordinating all those public meetings and things, I think are something that may warrant there being a deposit. And, just because you're not dealing with one applicant, and which is much simpler, you're going to be, and we all know Terramina eventually is going to come in, and that's going to be a number of people, but that's really totally at your discretion too, whether you feel that should be, if a fee added to that is a burden for people coming in and doing a district.
well, they're going to have to get the 51%
Right,
before they come, right? So we already know that there's quite a few people. It's not just
They
like
can
one
spread the-
person and, saying, let's put the city to work making this, but they have to come with their application showing the 51% of the property owners, not just the residents.
So maybe my recommendation that for a historic district, you have some minimal amount of deposit that we can work off if there's something unusual or out of the way, such as a legal has to work with us on making sure that the district and the votes are right, the people are right, the signatures are right. There was a controversy, and I don't know if it still exists with Terramina, regarding is it property owner and one vote per property owner, or does the entity get more because they own, there could possibly be some legal issues. So I would think that you would want to have some kind of deposit so that if it ends up being something out of the ordinary, we can recoup some costs. I don't think that normally happens with the landmarking process because I'm sorry, so, yes.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to get you. Did we know what the charges were in the county of Ventura for districts?
No, they didn't have, I didn't see.
Or the city or anything like that for districts?
See it.
Okay, I just wanted to see if there was a reference.
I'm happy to look up, I think that's what we need to do is get, if you guys, the commission give me some recommendations on some cities, or maybe I could call the state and call Sean again, and maybe he has, maybe they have some clearinghouse or something where they could kind of tell us, or some resources, and I'd be happy to do that and come back with those. Like I said, I wanted to bring this back to you because, we should have done it back in December, and I didn't want it to fall off your radar. But I didn't necessarily want to make it without, we've got some people missing tonight that may have, want to have some input in it. And so, given the fact that we have 3 members missing, and I think I need to provide a little bit more information to you, I'm happy with just direction and bringing it back in May.
Well, the one issue I thought would maybe to look up is the annual inspection fee
Yeah.
for the Mills Act. If there could be a smaller upfront, but then some $200 a year that they pay to have an inspector actually come out and meet with them. And then we also asked whether there could be a sliding scale on the Mills Act, because some houses, their property tax benefit might not be that great overall. It's not like some of these multi-million-dollar homes on Foothill where the savings are going to be so great they could afford $6,000 or $7,000 out of that tax savings to pay the city for its work. But if it's a small little house, on one of these back streets, that might overwhelm, and they would never
apply.
It would be a disincentive for them because they're going to get a few $100s every year back, but they're going to have to pay out front $5,000 or $6,000, and they may just say, that's too much for us.
Okay. The other thing that I think that that you need to coordinate between, as we talked about, having a process by where you would update your landmarking. So when a person realizes that, they for whatever reason, they want to change their landmark status, for whatever reason. We've had these discussions before. Somebody wants to change their landmark status, or we want to change it, it'd be different. But if someone wanted to come in and say, I think one of the examples that was given was the Clark property, they wanted to come in and change something,
Right.
the fencing or something. That I understand landmarking originally, you want to have no fee, but you really should consider that, well, if it's landmarked and you've had these, character defining things articulated in the landmark, and somebody comes in and says, yeah, but I really don't want these items to be landmarked, and I want to come back and revisit it, then at that point, I really think that there should be a fee.
I agree.
Because there are a lot of things in the history and the files that I've seen here where they start off one thing and then they realize, oh, I really don't like the way that affects my property and I'm going to change it. And so we're constantly having, the city not recovering fees based on someone changing their mind throughout the process. So I would think maybe you'd want to consider, if someone's going to come in and change their landmark, what the process would be and what we would charge for that. And then also, the annual inspections, and then, like we said, updating your Mills Act program probably shouldn't have any fee to it, again, for the same reason, because, somebody needs to spend money putting together what they're doing the next 10 years, and maybe there should just be, that should be really minor, fee to submit that back in and have it come before you so that you could then see what the next 10 years are going to be doing. We only get those for 10 years, and so then after the first 10 years runs off, there really isn't any other, correlation or nexus between what they're doing on their property and their tax
But if
benefit.
they're inspected every year, then they would be reminded that they need to come up with a budget.
New one.
And it would make sense to have an inspection fee for that, because there's a fair amount of staff time involved in putting those
Oh, yeah.
inspections together. The other
I'd
point I-
rather see that than have it all up front, but
The other point I wanted to add to what Kathy was saying is on someone who comes in to clarify their landmark, because as you know, some of the prior landmark designations may not have had a lot of clarity as to what are the character defining elements and what are not the character defining elements. If they came in the context of a development project to try to define their character defining elements to not include something they're trying to then modify, where they wouldn't be, if that's accomplished, they wouldn't be in for a work permit, but it's driven by a development process, that would be an appropriate point to think about a fee for that clarification of the landmark, because it's really driven by a development process, as opposed to someone coming in just seeking to landmark.
And I think there's also a difference between, like you were saying, when somebody comes and wants to do something structural to change, to
Right.
really alter the landmark itself, then somebody might come in and we just have to determine whether what they're doing is appropriate for that kind of property or for that kind of historical thing. And that wouldn't be as serious of a situation. We would just simply look at what they want to do and say, no, that really isn't compatible. But it doesn't really involve the whole structural thing.
I think we want to make it that open and inviting to people that have landmark properties to be able to come in and consult with you and be free to ask questions, but at some point that they're actually coming in and wanting to change a character defining element or something that's part of the landmark, that then they are paying for staff time, because we know that those are going to take a lot of time and a lot of analysis when we start to get into those elements. I
Right.
totally agree.
Yes, Commissioner Hill?
I would like to add the words of an important Ojai person, and this was in regard to a city council meeting, and I'm going to quote council member Laura. In regard to the fee for landmarking, he went and said that felt the fee recommendation should go before the Historic Preservation Commission to review. He thought that the $5,000 would discourage people from applying for landmark designation. And that's the way we've always felt, that the heavy-hitting part of the fees should be when they go for the Mills Act, because the applicant is going to receive benefits from doing that. So you were quoted.
All right, so shall we continue this until our next meeting and give you something to work with?
Yes, so as I said before, generally speaking, in the city of Ojai, we don't have fees, we have deposits, and we work off of expenses that then we debit off of the deposits. So there's two things to look at. One, whether do you want to have any fees or deposits at all? And then two, that because it is a deposit, we want it to be reasonable upfront so that even if a person is working on something, coming in with a $5,000 deposit up front that you may or may not use, that's a lot of money for the city to have control over. So deposits work that if we can't operate in the zero or a negative, person would be asked to replenish that deposit. So they don't necessarily have to be so high and be so, to give kind of a negative attitude or negative connotation to the process, because those were what it takes staff to process some of these things based on time and materials. But clearly, there are going to be those that fall underneath that. So having the deposit so high too is also a deterrent. So I'm just saying, if we're going to have a deposit for Mills Act, the way that I'm restructuring the applications is I'm creating a financial responsible party. We have the property owner, the applicant, the representative, the financial responsibility party, and I'm making sure the person understands their deposits. So, that's how we're going to go. So I just want to make sure that everybody understands that when it says $5,000, It's a deposit. So, you know, if it's good and clean and together, like we were just talking a minute ago, and we can take it to one meeting, there's no way that they would have expended $5,000. So lowering that deposit to allow more people to participate in the process is not a problem.
But how about if somebody landmarks their house and they want to make a small change on it, and they bring it to us and they put a deposit in, maybe of $500, and the actual cost for staff time comes to $2,000. Can we somehow make it that because it's a public benefit for them to have that as a landmark, that they wouldn't have to pay the full recovery, that they would just have to pay some?
So like I said, so I think that we need to two-tier things. We need to have a minor and a major, which then we would then coordinate with the ordinance or some of the other things. Matt would help weave them together so things are coordinated. So there's a definition very clearly of what is minor, and we'd bring that back to you, which would say, okay, minor is, you know, painting, non-structural improvements, you know, painting, some landscape changes or something like that. Whatever you know, we would make a recommendation, you would concur or modify as needed. And then that would probably be just a straight fee, you know, $200 and not based on expenses. So generally speaking, everything in Ojai, $500 and less is a fee, $500 more is a deposit. You know, that's just how they kind of work it. So all of our, if you turn to the page where it shows the fees that were proposed, I think it shows in there.
Yeah.
There's a fee and then there's a deposit. You only have one page, but, so you'll see right here. If you turn to page 6 of 6 where it says historic landmark plaque, that's a fee, not a deposit. So you can create things as deposits, you can create things as just straight fees where it wouldn't escalate up or down.
Okay.
So that's what I think we need to do on the things that you really want to have the social benefit to, or the benefit, the public benefit. You just make them fees, or you make them zero, and then you would put the rationale behind it, and then we would present that to city council.
We always have the ability to waive a fee, like if they come and they say, well, I want to change my place, but I want to restore it back to, I want to take this part of it and restore it back to its original look. That would be a work permit needed. And we might say, well, that's so great that you're going to restore this part of it. We don't want to charge you any fee for that.
Generally, this council can waive a fee, not the commission.
Okay.
Because, and the reason for that is that waiving a fee is giving money out of the public fisc to a member of the public. That fiscal decision has to be made by the council. But it's certainly justifiable if there's a public benefit.
Okay.
If there's not a public benefit, it gets into the gift of public funds issue, which is, there's a state constitutional prohibition on gifting public funds, which is included in fee waivers. But certainly, something like that probably would qualify.
Okay.
Could we recommend to the city council?
Yes.
Yes, certainly.
Okay.
So we would send a recommendation to them that on this project, because of the wonderful work this person's doing, that they waive that fee, and then they would
Yes.
act on that.
Yep.
Okay.
So with that, I guess I just ask that you give me some idea of what the fees are that you want to see. I think, Matt, do you have them listed down? I think I started to write them down, that you're wanting an annual inspection fee or maintenance fee, whatever we want to call it, for the Mills Act. We're wanting some kind of sliding or delineate between work permits that are minor and work permits that are major, and come up with a very small nominal fee for minor and a deposit for major, and kind of define those. And that we continue to offer the historic plaques with no fee, that is per the ordinance. And that we keep the deposit for the Mills Act to be, it's proposed right now at, I think, $4,640, which is pretty close to $5,000. We probably keep it at about $2,000, I would say. Maybe maybe you guys talk about that.
For the Mills Act?
Yeah, you know, to start off with that deposit and then see where it goes from there. I mean, like I said, if you look back at the firehouse as an example, that didn't require a lot of staff work to do that Mills Act when she came in. Others might require more, so we want to keep the deposit kind of in the middle range so that, you know, we're not asking people to put in a lot of money that might be simple. I mean, I don't know, it's just a thought. And then,
But that is only, would only be the case if you settle this maintenance fee schedule. You would have to have that in order for this to work.
right.
It'd be all done at once.
Yeah, it'd all be one package.
Correct.
And then I would suggest that you think about this historic districts having some kind of deposit fee, because I think just by the sheer nature of the fact that they're very large and have a lot of people, and there's going to be generally speaking.
Litigious.
Thank you. I was trying to be cautious there, but I would think that we need something, because I believe these historic districts, unlike the landmarking process and the Mills Act process, might involve a little bit more staff time as it regards to the city attorney and things of that nature.
And part of the complexity for a historic district comes out of the fact that I would guess we would likely end up in the case where a significant majority, at least 51, of course, % of the community of that district supports the district, and there would also likely be a vocal, potentially litigious minority that does not support it, which would make the processing, the meetings more complex.
And then, let's see, was there some way that we could do the sliding scale on the Mills Act, so someone that has a $400,000 historic home
Yeah.
that they want is not charged the same amount as someone who has a $10 million home?
I think it really is just going to come down to, you could have somebody who has a really small value, low value home that isn't doing their due diligence to submit in an adequate package and require a lot of handholding by city, and that's going to escalate the cost to the city to do that. I don't know that there's any nexus between the value of the home and the amount of work. I mean, do you?
I mean, the trick with the fees, we can't have the fee higher than the costs. That's under Proposition 26.
Right.
So you might consider setting a lower deposit for those smaller size, smaller value. Better would be smaller potential Mills Act benefit, where it's tied not to the value of the house, but it's tied to the value of the benefit. Set a small deposit. Mm-hmm. That way, if it turns out that our costs are lower than that deposit, then we kick it back to them. If it turns out that they have a small project but a challenging submittal, or it becomes very controversial and costs rise, then the city would be able to recover those costs.
Well, I'm just trying to figure out a way to keep the amount that they pay overall, after all is said and done, somewhere reasonable in line with what they're going to be receiving, because we're going to ask them to take quite a bit of that, or most of that, tax benefit and use it to restore and to maintain the house as a historic property.
And that's the whole underlying scheme for a Mills Act. It's the
Yeah.
reason you get the benefit.
And so if the staff time winds up being so much that it's going to be a disincentive for them even to do it, it would be nice if there was some way we could build it in that the city would absorb some of that cost for those people. Do you see what I'm saying?
Can I?
I know it makes it complicated.
No, it's fine. Can I just offer, so in working along with the ordinance change that you're working along in the subcommittee and the city attorney and myself, I do believe that we need to really make sure that we have good parameters that we're providing out there regarding what's expected of a Mills Act in that first 10 years it comes in. I think the clearer we are on the expectations to the public, the more definitive their application will come in and the less time staff will have to spend on it. I know when we worked on the fire station, she was very confused about what would qualify as maintenance and what wouldn't, and I think if we want to keep fees down for the public, then one of the things we can do is make sure that you're very clear on what is Mills Act worthy. And so I think that's where I think that you get the benefit to the person who's not getting a large Mills Act reduction, is that you can look at those things that you're requiring of that person as being more, if you've got a modest house, then we're going to allow maintenance of that house, paint and these things to qualify as your Mills Act program. And that's kind of where the discretion goes. But I do think we need to kind of really tighten that up because it is very hard. We don't landmark often enough that there's a consistency with what we require, and the houses and the properties that we landmark aren't similar enough that there's any. So I think that's where it really comes down to is that if we have a pre-meeting, if we'd establish a pre-meeting for a Mills Act person, I'm thinking like a concept review, but I'm thinking about doing a Mills Act, and we set parameters out to them very quickly, very front, when we take them to you and you say, okay, here's the property and here's what we think we would like you to do, something in this range, you're going to help them to find the process and keep staff time at a minimum. And so I think that's something we need to work with Matt and make sure that we're doing both sides of this so that we are really encouraging people and we're very clear and transparent about what we're going to expect. And I think both halves of the whole will really help the public. Okay?
Okay.
I'd just like to also point out that in page or attachment C, the very end of your staff report, that's how we will be presenting something like this. This is just a draft for you to the mayor from Historic Preservation through me, and then so we'll do it formal like this for you once we have a formalized, okay?
That'd be great. So do we have any other comments from the commissioners? So do we need to continue this till our next meeting, or?
Because this isn't a specific application, there's no need to formally continue it. The reason we formally continue an application that involved a public hearing is so that they don't have to renotice it again if you continue to a specific date, and there's no requirement to renotice.
Okay.
But for this, it's legislative as opposed to quasi-adjudicative, so that particular requirement doesn't apply.
So we'll just consider this a first discussion and that you'll
Yep.
bring back some ideas.
And I think we've got some clear direction as to where to go. And thank you for the sample from the other cities.
Okay, sure.
And the other point I wanted to note on the other cities, is that it may not be the case that some of the other cities would have a specific fee for historic districts, because that's not a super common thing, particularly in smaller cities. But we might look to LA.
But
LA has a number of historic
I think
districts.
Ventura has 3 or 4. They said on their website they have 3 or 4 historic districts.
Well, that's more than I realized.
And
Fair.
I'm not sure how many historic districts we could get out of Ojai, but probably not that many really, because we're not that big, and there aren't really that many that come to mind, but there might be a few.
We'll look into that.
Okay, let's see.
I have a question then, and I didn't see it on the agenda tonight, and that was the report of the subcommittees. Were we going to have a report of the subcommittee that we have served on?
I was going to maybe have you do that when we got down to the.
Okay, and then
Commissioner comments.
would this be discussed then at that subcommittee meeting about the fees in regard to the ordinance?
We would discuss how the two of them fit together.
Okay,
We wouldn't be making a further, the subcommittee's recommendation, as I envision it, will be changes in the ordinance that will run along with the changes of the fees, but the subcommittee won't recommend the fee changes,
okay.
as that's been discussed here.
Okay, moving along to the planning report, item number 6.
I don't know of anything new that has come in for current planning activities that involve historic preservation. I will say that we have received an application for design review permit for the 1105 Signal property, of which some people feel the house that's there is historic.
Yeah.
Okay? So I will say that.
It's not landmarked, though.
No.
No, it's not landmarked. And I'm thinking if there's anything else, and
Do you want to tell the other commissioners a little bit more about the moratorium on the fences and
Yes, so the city council has adopted a moratorium, and on their agenda for Tuesday night, there's a extension of that moratorium, and the moratorium prohibits the installation of fencing above 3 feet in height, as it would be proposed within the side or rear setback yards of any lot where the side and rear and side yards are adjacent to a drive, a street, or alley. So, one of the concerns is that we continue to have, we have lots that it's sometimes very difficult to tell whether it's the front or the side, and we end up with side yard fences that really function like front yards, and the city has long-standing had a prohibition against any fence in the front yard setback higher than 3 feet, and so the moratorium really just mirrors what's already going on in the front yard when it's adjacent to a street. So it doesn't affect anybody where your rear yard abuts another rear yard, or an interior lot where your side yard abuts another side yard. But it does affect those people who have corner lots, or sometimes 3-sided lots, or sometimes 5, as there are in Ojai. So that is what, like I said, it's proposed for extension for another 10 months and 45 days, 10 months?
The first moratorium was for 45 days, and the extension is for 10 months and 15 days, for a total of 1 year. And then the council can, at the expiration of the first year, the council could extend it for another year if desired. And if the council finds that the current issues that justify the moratorium still exist.
Okay, Commissioner Hill?
Yes, in your description of 2 sides, 3 sides, 5 sides, and so on, one of the things that has happened with a recent decision that we have made was based on the front yard. And the homeowner now claims that's not his front yard, that's his backyard. And so all of our decisions were made on the frontage of the house as it appears on Foothill. But now he's saying that's his backyard, and he should be able to exceed
Well, I
the
think
limit.
this moratorium would make our life a lot easier here on this commission if that was the case,
Yeah.
that any frontage on a public thoroughfare would be considered visible from the street and only 3 feet. It would make it a lot easier to,
And
Anyway,
that's,
that was an issue.
Yeah.
The
Right.
definition of front yard and backyard.
Well, I think it's confusing to a lot of people because we have very clear guidelines on what is a front yard, but it often is not what is intuitive to people, which is, most people think, well, that's where my front door is, or that's where my mailbox is, or that's where I drive my car. And it really, for our purposes, as far as land use is concerned, and establishing whether it's a front yard setback or a side yard setback, none of those really matter. Your front yard is determined at the point that the lot has nothing on it. So when a person comes in with a vacant lot, we have to right then and there establish the front yard. You couldn't build a house unless we established the front yard. So it really has nothing to do with the front door or the mailbox. It starts with a vacant piece of land. That's when it's first decided. So I know it's counterintuitive from how most people see it. So that's why I think it's really important that we do clarify that.
and that's built into the code in terms of clearly defines what is the front yard versus the side and rear. It's just the issue arises when it doesn't always match practice.
so the moratorium would be just, if it's on a street, it's
Yeah.
it's the same as the front yard.
Right, the moratorium makes the rules the same for front, side, rear, setback, but only within the setback area, and that are adjacent to a public or private street. It's not just public streets. It's any car, thoroughfare, or conveyance.
So could someone build a 6-foot wall? How far back is the setback? Could they build?
Just would depend on what zone you're in.
But if you've got the house, say, setback by 100 feet, could they build like 20 feet back, a 6-foot?
It would depend.
It would depend on the zone. Each zone has a different set of setbacks. If the zone, for example, if the setbacks in the zone for this hypothetical were 15 feet, then you could build a wall at 20 feet because it would be outside the setback. The moratorium only applies in the setback area, which is set by the zone.
So we should probably look at that as an issue in the historic code in terms of houses that are landmarked, what would be allowed for them.
And that's part of what we've been looking at in the subcommittee.
Okay.
So can I make a comment? I know you touched on this, but I think what the public doesn't really clearly get is this whole front yard thing has to do with the line of sight as regards to traffic safety. So it's when you look down the street, you're able to see. Otherwise, we just have these walls that go up. And it's like a canyon of walls almost, and that's the 3 foot. That's what it has to do with the 3 feet. And I mean, even if it was a hedge, it would be a problem, and that has been a problem. I know in the zone that I live in, that 3 foot requirement goes back to the front of my house, and it's because it has to do with looking down the street. And also, a lot of people don't understand why fences, there's actually a safety requirement about 6 foot fences, and it relates directly to the fire department, and then being able to get over the walls to fight a fire easily. So in other words, if you have a 10-foot wall, it's hard to get over. I mean, not impossible, but isn't that so? That's
Yes,
a safety requirement?
I think that generally speaking, you have to think about it this way, not only, so signs and like monument signs and all those things, normally in most cities, it's 3.5 feet, because someone somewhere along the line decided that's about what you can see when you're sitting in a car. And so when you're pulling out of your driveway, we all allow single-family homes to back out of their driveways. And so, a lot of the car goes before you're actually going past it. And it's not only seeing down the street, which is really important, but it's also seeing on the sidewalk, because back in my day when little children rode tricycles and big wheels, they're pretty darn low to the ground. Also are people who are walking dogs. And so the idea is, not only to see the traffic that's coming up, but pedestrian. And as you know now, in most cities, we're trying to make streets and sidewalks friendly for all modes of transportation, whether you're a bicyclist or you're someone walking a dog or you're riding your trike. And so we need to see all those things when we're coming out of our driveway and having clearance. So yes, that is exactly what it's there for.
Yeah,
Thank you.
you hit the nail right on the head. And the other point to note is that something like a 10-foot wall is not permitted anywhere in the city,
Right.
unless you get a variance. The max height is 6 feet, and a 10-foot wall's variance would be a challenging variance.
Right. Okay, thanks for clarifying that.
I was at the meeting when the council discussed this originally, and in the recommendation or the proposal, there was kind of a calling out of the Arbolada area for some special recognition of the problem there, because it is historic and it was designed to be open space, and the council didn't seem to want to make a distinction between one area and another area within the city. Is the only way that the Arbolada can be treated a little differently because of the nature of that neighborhood is for it to be a historic district? Or?
That's the cleanest way. Part of the trouble that the council faced is that if it's not a historic district, but you're imposing a requirement to kick through the Historic Preservation Commission for a permit, say for a fence that would otherwise be exempt from permitting, it creates some challenging issues where the code has to be written very clearly to define exactly what does and does not require or require a trip through the HPC for a permit. And it can create political challenges in terms of getting buy-in from the community. Whereas if you go through the historic district process up front, then there's that buy-in from the community, or at least from a significant majority of the community, that makes it, and it also makes it cleaner in terms of it's very clear that the HPC has jurisdiction.
Well, I didn't really
and what the standards
like
are.
the idea of them coming to us if they just, I didn't like that idea at all, of that they would have to bring their fence idea to our commission when they weren't a historic building. I'm just talking about having different rules for a neighborhood that is a recognized, has a certain recognized character to it, not that they would have to get our permission or not, but.
So as part of this moratorium, one of the things that you have to do is you have to show that you're working on changing the regulations, and that's what we're doing through neighborhood planning. So to answer your question, that's exactly what neighborhood planning is doing, is looking at not each individual, but, aggregating some neighborhoods that are similar, but the Arbolada probably doesn't have a similar neighborhood, so it's probably going to be called out separately. And they'll be looking at that and making recommendations on regulations that are specific to what the needs are in that particular
Oh,
neighborhood.
well, that's hopeful. And is there a way
And
that-
there is a way that we could structure it within the code and would be legal to have a different set of standards for a particular neighborhood with appropriate justification.
And is there a way that we could work with the county so that they might take an interest in the area that
We
wasn't?
can try. The county, we can't force the county to play
Oh,
ball.
I know we can't force them, but I know in other areas, they've worked on little agreements. I think they did with that tax, there was a tax they did, where they got areas beyond the city limits. I can't remember what it was, but is there something like that where an agreement can be made between the city and the county to?
I'm not exactly sure what previous agreement you're referring to. There's a couple of approaches that can be taken for that so it sounds like what I'm hearing is, could we work with the county to establish standards governing fences and other issues in areas adjacent to the city but within the county?
Right.
And if those standards are zoning standards, then there's kind of two ways to do it. One would be to kind of enter into an agreement with the county. I'm not exactly sure what that would look like, and we would have no power to compel them to join. It'd have to be voluntary on their end to
Right.
do matching zoning. The other approach would be if those areas that you're referring to are in the city's sphere of influence, but outside our boundary, which is the area that is outside our boundary, but within our area that we're anticipating annexing at some point, then we can pre-zone areas that are in our sphere of influence. And if we pre-zone an area, then the county still has land use jurisdiction over that area, but they have to look at our pre-zoning and be consistent with it. We wouldn't have the power to enforce it, but the county has that power, but they have to at least look at what we've pre-zoned. Pre-zoning only works if you're in the sphere of influence, which is determined by LAFCO, and I don't know exactly the exact boundaries of Ojai's sphere of influence relative to that area. So that might not apply to this particular area, but that's possible generally.
Part of the neighborhood planning is to ask the residents of these areas and say, would this be something that you would support, is having a fence and wall ordinance that would leave the place more open?
And this is exactly why the council is reasonable, assuming it acts on Tuesday, to extend the moratorium, because it buys time, keeping the status quo in place, to be able to work through these issues and accomplish the neighborhood planning process, and to accomplish this, working with the county if desired, and to take the temperature of the community, particularly the Arbolada community.
All right, thank you. Future agenda items, these were some items that I actually wrote to Kathleen and to Darwin, because they were things that had kind of been on the back burner that we had put off, and I thought maybe we would bring them up at some point, because the arcade banner policy, I think that went to the council, and I think they gave it back to us, but we haven't.
Well, actually, I was going to just, if I can, interject on that. And so the motion that the council had was not to give it back to you. That wasn't in the motion. So I talked to the city manager, you sent these three things to me, and I just wanted to make sure, so I had some basis to talk to you about tonight. What their motion did say was that they not to enforce the prohibition on the pixies and not to enforce the prohibition on the lanterns. They allowed those things to go on for this year. Okay, so what the city manager and I spoke about was taking the item back to the city council for them to give specific directions to you regarding additional work on the arcade and what they wanted you to do. Because you could correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think that you're going to alter your pennant policy, that was your recommendation. So they need to give you specific direction on where you need to take another look.
Yeah, well, first of all, I don't think we ever had a prohibition on the pixies. That's what I didn't understand. They came to us, we had an emergency meeting that was like last minute, and they wanted to do something new, which was to advertise a product instead of an event that was going on. And so time was of the essence, so we said, okay, we'll have the ability to approve a banner for 1 year and then come back and look at it in more. But it wasn't for all banners. We said that if they were an established group, they could just go on with their banner until they wanted to put a new banner.
So can I just make one suggestion, because I know Rose isn't here, but it really concerns her that I do it too. Pennants. she's always correcting us, not banners, pennants. Banners, the thing that goes over Ojai, and pennants, I do it too. And she corrected me via an email, so I'm
Well,
sure.
now apparently it's going to include hanging lanterns, or I don't know.
So I just want to say this, that it's not agendized for tonight,
That
so
was
there's a
my point.
limited amount of time we can spend talking about it. But I just want to make sure that you understood that we're going to ask city council to give you clarification on what the issues were and what we need to address, okay? So that I bring it back to you with clear direction on the issues that are still at hand. And I don't know that any of us know that.
I felt there was some misinformation that went to the council, particularly that we were saying that everybody in the Ojai Festival showed up and said, we don't want to have to come back every year to get permission. And it said right in the policy that once they were in, they could just keep doing it until they changed the design of their pennant.
I don't know, are they the ones that use the lanterns?
They did use the lanterns.
I think they only came, my understanding with, again, I don't want to.
I don't think we need to belabor this point
Yeah.
because it's not on the agenda for discussion. It's on the agenda as a future agenda item, meaning it'll be brought back at a future meeting. And I think this discussion makes it clear that a further review and specific direction by the city council as to what they're looking for, which may well be to have things have a once and done permit, not an annual permit, then bring that direction back to you for full discussion. I would caution against further substantive discussion of the item tonight.
Okay.
Okay, and then on the next one down, discuss a budget proposal to include monies for updating landmark designations in preparation of Phase 1 reports on potential landmarks. Again, I think that we're getting into the budget year, and I don't know how Matt feels about this, but again, it's not been agendized. I don't have a staff report for you tonight. I didn't really know what it was you wanted to discuss. Are you interested in doing a subcommittee to discuss this, or?
Well, when we were at our subcommittee meeting, I think it was raised even by you that said, well, this is obviously going to incur some expense, and so we should go to the council with a budget that would include these things. So that's why I suggested that.
And I think the way to accomplish that would be to put it on the agenda for this commission to make a proposal to the council
Okay.
as a formal recommendation to the council that we recommend adding money to the budget to allow for 2 landmarks a year, or 3 or 4, whatever the number is.
Right. Okay.
What I would say is I did a budget proposal, that included training for you commissioners. I can't recall off the top of my head if I included anything for landmarking, but I will include this for the next May meeting, that our proposed budget for HPC, and then you could redline that or make proposed amendments as necessary.
Okay.
Would that be good? All right.
Gary?
That usually is done with you and the chair. So you would work through, and Darwin would submit the budget request.
Well, since, I don't know if, I guess, and I'll call Darwin and converse with him, but I think that in talking with him, I don't know that, he may just defer to you at this point,
Okay.
to vice chair. I don't know, because then I will do that. I'll reach out to him next week and find out if I can get a proposal or a recommendation that we can modify the budget, okay?
And on that particular point, it might be useful to have the full commission's support
Oh, yeah.
for bringing the proposal forward,
Right.
but particularly on the point that starting a budget line item for the HPC to take the work and undertake the effort to landmark properties itself. There's a policy decision built into that budget decision that I think would make sense to be separately called out for review and consideration by this commission, and then review and consideration by the council.
Okay, great. And then, of course, we've always been talking about prioritizing properties that we might want to landmark, so that would just be another discussion. I think we were going to do that actually at our annual retreat, which never really happens.
Way late.
All right, commissioner comments.
I don't know if this is appropriate to bring up, but I noticed here in a meeting that I missed dated February 12th, there's an item in here about the cemetery sign. Can I give a little update on that?
Sure.
the cemetery sign was rebuilt by me in 2011 as a volunteer for the city of Ojai. And some of you may have noticed driving by it that the actual signage part of it saying, is it Ojai Cemetery? Nordhoff Cemetery. And to think I painted it and I can't remember that. But it disintegrated because of incompatibility of materials, unfortunately, which was a real bummer. But in any event, the city was kind enough to fund the repainting of it from a sign painter. So I handled that once again as a volunteer. And I really have no idea what you guys really talked about that meeting. But we went ahead and basically had it redone as it was. And then I reinstalled it. And as I do every year, I repainted the sign and
Nice.
restained the roof. So like the Golden Gate Bridge, it gets constantly rehabbed. Yeah.
Start on one side, work your way across.
So it looks much better, and that's all I wanted to say about it. Thank you.
Great. Any other comments? Terry, do you want to talk about the meeting, the workshop?
Okay, yeah, I'll talk about the workshop. It was, as I mentioned before, and kind of give a description of it, the meeting was all day. We had speakers from both the state and from the county who spoke on historic preservation, and they stepped on the ideas that we have tossed around many, many times. Kathleen was there also, and I noticed that she was hobnobbing with a lot of the people that were important. And in fact, I stepped forward just at the very end of the meeting when I saw Kathleen talking with a commissioner from the county and encouraged them to talk about an issue that has been important to us, and that is the recognition of other historic report writers, such as we have with Judy Treem and Mitch Stone, that perhaps he could suggest some to her. And they had a lively discussion, and I'm sure there's a lot of good information going on there. I have some notes that one of the thing, every time that I've watched Kathleen tonight, and she has used she has used the words, and a smile starts on her face, and that's the word character-defining features. And so we all kind of looked at each other also, and one of the criticism at our when we were involved with the Neff lounge thing is that our ordinance did not contain character-defining features. And so we were kind of tuned into all of those things, and it was too bad that we didn't have more commissioners. We didn't have any city council members at that meeting, and it would have been really nice to see some of them, because there was a lot of good, really good, solid information that was departed to us. And the next day, I think it was the next day or 2 days later, we had a subcommittee meeting, and in that we were dealing with the ordinance, and a lot was coming together at that meeting. And one of the things that we were trying to do, in addition to drafting an ordinance, was to draft a timeline as to when things would happen, so that we wouldn't be faced with the attorneys from, in this case, the Crown family, stating that, that 12-month thing, that wouldn't stand, or we're building in activities, what would go first, what would go second, and so on. And that'll be coming up at our next meeting.
And the next meeting is Monday.
Monday. That was my next question, is when is that going to be?
Time flies, and
Golden Gate Bridge.
yep. And the other key element, just to add to Commissioner Hill's comments, is that the other thing we're looking at as a subcommittee, which will be brought to you once it's drafted, as a set of recommendations, and is to clarify the lines of process
Right.
between this commission, the planning commission, the city council, so that if an applicant is saying, I own a landmark property, I want to do this, I want to demolish and rebuild, okay, that's a very complex project. I own a landmark and I'd like to add an addition, okay, that goes this way. I own a landmark and I'd like to redo my kitchen, okay, that goes this way. Clear lines of paths.
Right.
And I spoke with Steve Schaefer, who's on the county commission, and we talked about the whole issue of these county landmarks that are within the city limits, like the old firehouse and the sycamore tree
And the post office.
and the post office, and that they can't really review any of those because they're not within.
So we have an
the-
update for you on that.
Oh, you do? Okay.
Yes, we
well
do,
then-
if I may. So working with Matt, we were frustrated as staff because we told people that are coming in wanting to modify county landmarks that they needed clearance from the county, to which the county told us, we're not going to give it. So Matt and I, and especially Matt, did a research on it, and he was able to determine that if the city council declares it as a landmark, doesn't say city landmark, doesn't say county landmark, it says if the city council declares it as a landmark, requires a work permit. So the determination was made with the fire station. We researched the resolution. The resolution clearly says city council declared it a landmark. It now triggers a work permit through you. So it's very clear that confusion, and it has been here in this city for years and years and years, didn't really need to be there. What it really is once it's declared a landmark, whether it be county, or state, national, whatever it is, once they declare it a landmark, through whatever process, it goes to you for a work permit.
Okay, and that was clearly done back when it was declared a landmark. It was the city council.
It was the
Right,
city
and
council.
that's the key element, is that the council acted to declare it a landmark. The one that would be quite complex would be if the Board of Supervisors declared it a landmark while the city had been incorporated. That would be a challenging matter. But in this case, and as I understand it, for most of the county landmarks, they were nominated by the county commission, but then declared by the city council. And that's what is the trigger. Even if it was done before the HPC was created, and thus before it was designated through that city's ordinance, because the council acted, that's what makes it a landmark. And thus, even if it's not numbered as a city landmark, it falls under the HPC's
So
jurisdiction.
if the owners of the property wanted Mills Act status, they would come to us as well, because the city would have to manage the Mills Act
Yeah, I think so.
for it as well, correct?
I would think so. And I think what I would suggest is if someone has a county landmark and they want to come for a Mills Act, as part of the Mills Act approval, we would also have the city council add to its previous declaration of landmarking and giving it a city number, and kind of adding, we declare this a landmark by resolution number whatnot from 1983. We reiterate that declaration and now declare this to be city landmark number whatnot,
I see.
which
okay.
would clean it up.
Can we do that then?
We certainly could. I would
With the firehouse?
want to research it further with that particular property, but I would think that we could do it. What I would want to ensure is that because it's already a landmark, so there wouldn't be any issues against because it's already a landmark, we wouldn't run into the issues where we'd be depriving the property of a property right, which we'd have to give them notice and hearing. Nonetheless, to be on the safe side, I would suggest that if we do that and the property owner isn't amenable, then we would definitely provide them notice and a hearing both before the HPC and before the council.
I think the real issue is that if you're just landmarking it, from county to city, probably no harm, no foul, as Matt says. If you were suggesting different character defining features than what the county had done, then you're not really just switching it from county to city. You're really creating a new set of rules and regulations for the landmarking. I mean, in general, that's, I think, the issue.
And that's still possible. The commission has the power to landmark a property
Oh,
over
yes.
over a property owner's objections. I know that may not be commonly done, but it's certainly possible. But before that can be done, you have to provide notice and an opportunity for a hearing for the property owner, which comports with basic due process
But as it
requirements.
is, if we just let it go, then they would just bring their suggested alterations to us instead of,
Yep,
because the county won't even do it.
Yes.
yeah, exactly. And so that's where, even if they don't re-designate it as a city landmark, they still have to come to you for a work permit.
Permit.
And there was one other thing they brought up at the meeting that I thought was kind of interesting, because we've had one or two times when we felt we were pressured, like an applicant came and they wanted the decision yesterday, and we didn't feel like we had enough information, or we didn't feel comfortable with what we had, that they suggested that you just table it. And that tabling you could table it with the understanding that they would bring back to you more information or answer your questions or whatever the commission needed. So is that a way that if we are in a spot like that we can respond? Because sometimes we just don't feel like we have what it takes, but the owner wants it done like right away.
You can certainly take that approach. I recommend if you're going to table something or continue it, same that effect, I recommend being
date certain.
clear to the applicant what additional information you're seeking.
Oh, I understand that. Okay.
And I also would recommend that it not be an indefinite tabling. At some point, they have a right to a clear up or down decision.
Oh, yeah, no, I understand that. But just sometimes it's like you don't really know, or you don't feel like you have enough information, but you can table it and ask them to bring back.
Yeah,
some-
certainly. And the key on all of that is any review in court would apply a reasonableness test to that.
Okay.
I should add that other places where I've worked, that is generally what happens, and the applicant has a right to stand up to you and say, I prefer you not continue or table the item, but just give me a denial because I would like to move forward to the next body. So, that's usually what happens, is usually a person will say, I'm not going to give you those things that you're asking for, and I just want you to go ahead and deny me based on whatever you're going to deny, and then I'll go forward. So lots of times it will put you in a position where you have to really make a decision, because obviously if the person isn't cooperative, it isn't going to do what you ask them to do, then you pretty much have no choice but to then take action on the deficiencies.
Part of our job is to negotiate with people and try to get the.
Certainly, and if in that rare case where an applicant simply straight up declares, you've asked me for these 3 additional reports, I will not give those to you, then you could say, well, based on your statements on the record that you're not going to provide me the 3 additional historic reports we would like, we'll deny the application as insufficient information. Then they can take that up. That'd be a rare case.
So the point I'm trying to make is that usually most applicants will agree to the continuance. It's not adversarial. But if it ever is adversarial and they're not willing, such as what might have happened with the Crown family, then you would just move to a denial, and as it played out
But
before.
what if we hadn't denied it?
Well, you can continue it over their objections as well, as long as you're within the Permit Streamlining Act point. The key there is that if you haven't acted within the Permit Streamlining Act's expiration point, then it's deemed denied. Staff will always track.
Denied?
No, pardon me, deem approved.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. Deem approved, and then they would challenge it. We would challenge it as insufficient information couldn't be approved. There's ways around a Permit Streamlining Act automatic approval, and we would use those tools if we need to. But in the majority of cases, staff always endeavors to never have a project be heard at the last possible hearing date before the Streamlining Act expires, because we never want to be in that position.
Right.
So for in most projects, in most cases, we can do a continuance over the applicant's objection for a month or 2 to provide additional information.
Okay. Well, we're just trying to work on ways that we don't get blindsided and have to make a decision. So it would be nice to have a notification period. We're working on that.
Right, and we'll look at that. As we've noted before, the 12-month notification period currently in the ordinance is unenforceable, but a shorter notification period would be reasonable, something not a year.
Right. But we could set up something like your moratorium where there's a notification period that could be continued for up to so long.
Right, there's a way to structure that reasonably. And it would also, that builds in a requirement that an applicant who has applied for a permit doesn't do anything until they get the decision.
Right.
Both in the gap between their application in an HPC hearing, and then if it involves a council trip, the gap between the HPC and the council trip.
Okay, thank you.
I'd just like to tag on what Terry said about the training. I'm sorry, I have to apologize because I neglected to send you. We've got a very nice letter from the state regarding the training, how pleased he was with the city of Ojai, not only the facility, but the snacks and the welcomeness, and that he's continued to hear lots of praise about the training here. So I'll make sure that you get a copy of that letter because it was very nice to receive a pleasant, we seldom ever get anybody that writes us to say nice things, so it was very nice.
I'd also like to thank you for all your work and organizing it and putting it together. I thought it was just wonderful.
And I had a lot of help from staff here. Amber helped me, and James Hahn, and Steve McClary even helped me, and the building inspector set up. So it was Sophocles over in the Parks Department, and so it was really a collaborative effort from everybody in the city, and so I want to make sure that everyone, we stayed another hour and a half after you all left, breaking down tables and putting away chairs.
Just let us know when you need us to help.
So I just kept on laughing and saying other job duties as assigned, but it really was, the city really worked well together and put that on. I'm so very happy with the assistance I got from everybody.
Maybe they'll come back again.
One thing that was so nice, that these people were so expert in, they've been down all these roads, and they urged us to use the state websites for the historic preservation, and we should all familiarize ourselves with the questions that are posed on the website, and the county people too were so gracious. They said, just give us a call. Oh, we'll do this for you. If you're planning, one of the things that we were planning on having is to certify our city. And the gal back there says, well, just don't send it in. Send it to me first and I'll check it out and help you get the project on the right road so that it'll better your chances of being awarded a certified city. But they were really good about that. And the people that were out there, the commissioners that were there, and the staff people that were there, they were asking really good questions. It wasn't like a bunch of yahoos that were sitting in an audience for the first time finding out about historic preservation. These guys knew what they were talking about, so it resulted in an excellent information for us.
I heard very good things about it from a number of my commissioners in Calabasas who attended.
Yes, they did.
All right, moving along to museum representative report. Mark?
Thank you, Chairman Walker. I was heartened to witness the cooperation that seems to be forthcoming between the Art Commission and the HBC regarding the possible project on the Playhouse, because the museum has been moving, exploring the possibility of actively cooperating with the Arts Commission on a number of projects as well, including the both of our respective art collections. We can help out with some storage and conservation issues, and down the road it'd be great if we could find a place to actually have an exhibit of perhaps our commingled collections that would always be around and perhaps would be somewhat more public friendly than, for example, the walls of the of City Hall. Not that we'd strip the art off of that, but there's lots of art that just hangs around and not doing enough. So we'd like to do more with that. What else is going on? Well, I have too much echo here, don't I? I'll back up. We had a Town Talk event recently that Commissioner Basaccia was involved in as a panelist about the backcountry of Ojai, Tales and Trails, which was really successful. We had over 100 people crowding into our museum. Don't tell the fire department. I meant 92. We had 92 people precisely, and no more. And it was such a popular event, we're going to do another one, Tales and Trails 2. We might call it Tales and Ales, and maybe explore the libation possibilities therein. Anyway, so look for that. That might be coming up. What else is going on? We just opened the annual Ojai Studio Artist Show, the group exhibit. If you have trouble seeing all the artist studios when you go on the tour in October, and there's an awful lot of them, this is an opportunity to come and see them all in one room, one per piece of art per person, and it's a great show, and they have a lot of new members last 2 years, so they're doing some interesting work, and of course the standby people are also doing interesting work. It's a really good show. We have not yet hired a new executive director. The process continues. Search committee on which Commissioner Akins sits is in the process of winnowing it down to the finalists, and that is ongoing. And that is the report from the museum.
Thank you. Mayor Lara?
Well, good evening, staff and Vice Chair Walker and fellow commissioners and liaison, and also newly appointed Arts Commissioner, so wearing 2 hats. Very good. Three hats. Good report, by the way. And I just want to comment on the meeting. Fabulous. I mean, I learned, even though I didn't have the pleasure to go to this training, I've already learned the defining character features, or
Yes, that's a big one.
character defining elements. It's really important to implement in our ordinance. And I know we're talking about processes, but I do like, which is important to know, but I like the fact that you guys, at least hearing it out here, have noted the importance of setting up a clear path at the beginning and working from there, and not making it rigid, because this is about preserving our historical character here in Ojai. So we want to make that look incentive. So that work that you're doing in itemizing specific fee items is really important to look at, and it's really going to be up for debate. But I think we could get, and we look at you guys for a strong recommendation on fees, structures. Obviously, there's going to be disagreements, but we need to talk about it. We need to have a healthy dialogue about it, and I think that's going to be coming up. Even if it doesn't come up this year, it is good to get started. It is good to look at LA and see what they do with their historical, and I trust that you guys are going to be able to put that together. It seems like you guys are having a really healthy working relationship. So it's good to hear. On the side of the city, we are going to be talking about the moratorium. As a council, we're going to see if we want to extend the moratorium. We will also extend the moratorium with transient vacation rentals in the city. I'm big on bringing goals. Goals, to me, priorities. We're going to be bringing up, not, I think, in a month, bringing that back up. Want to see what again, reach out to Historic Preservation Commission, as long as the other commissions, see what's on their plate. I think it's important us to revisit that. I did it at the beginning of the year. I want to do that again, and possibly again before my term is up as mayor. When thinking about, there's also, we're going to be talking about pre-meetings with the Planning Commission. It's up for debate. Again, another procedural thing that we're looking at as a council. It just seems to be a more of a concept nowadays, updating and looking at our ordinance, our procedures, our checklists, our guidelines, to avoid anything like the Neff Lounge or 1105 or stuff like that. So other than that, if you guys have any questions for me, if not, then thank you guys for a lively and entertaining, and maybe in the future we'll do some more. What's the term you use? Hobnobbing?
Yes.
Yes, hobnobbing.
Hobnobbing.
I had a question or a comment, because I noticed at your last meeting, you guys agreed to extend an invitation to the school district to discuss matters of common interest, one of which would be the Ojai Unified School District offices and the future of those buildings. And I would really like to encourage you to work with them to evaluate it for its historic merit, and to try to come up with a plan that would allow the new use for that property, but would also honor its past and retain that as much as possible. So anything we can do on the commission to help with that process, we'd be happy to assist in evaluating the building or whatever.
Well, thank you, and you're absolutely right. And I think I heard, if I'm correct, that they did accept the offer. So we are looking at possible dates and possibly a meeting before that with myself and the superintendent, our city manager, and their chair to talk about that. But yeah, that's what got it started, was when I guess I'm thinking that some of you commissioners alerted us that they might be selling the building as possibly looking at this. So it's a good dialogue, and we could collaborate and work in different areas too. That's what we're trying to do, is build a working relationship with different agencies, no matter what they do. I think it's important. It's a good thing to have in a small community, working together, because not one agency is more important than another one, or as important.
Because I've noticed in a lot of communities, I did some research on it, and when a school district declares property surplus, it does create an area of interest, not only for the school district, obviously, but for the community, because schools are so central to the community, and their buildings like ours are right downtown in a prime location, and there could be some wonderful uses for that property that would benefit the community as well as the school districts. So.
And I appreciate it, and I would welcome anybody that's hearing in the public to submit and actually to come to this meeting and comment on that. I know it's going to be an hour and a half, and we're going to have time limited, but it is important to come in and voice your opinion about it. It's definitely a starting point, and I'm sure we'll be able to come up with something at the end of the meeting, some details that we could work on, some work. And also going back to, I just reminded to the pennant ordinance. I thought, and I'll go back and look at the video. For some reason, I thought our motion did include turning it back to you guys with some specific items, some specific numbers on that. But again, I'm more than welcome to come back to council if we weren't clear. I think staff is absolutely right that we should be clear and see, because there was there were some issues on there, but I don't want to speak. I just want to make sure that we do turn it back and we are clear in our direction. So I think it's starting out good, and I like the vibe. I mean, I appreciate your guys' hard work, because it's rewarding. You guys are putting your time and effort into this, and it's as a individual council member / mayor, I really appreciate that work. So thank you guys.
Thank you.
Okay.
Okay, what's next? Adjournment.
Guys, you're good. The school board.
Kathy?
What was that?
And it's a question of whether or not they're
Kathy?
Oh, no. Sorry, no.
Or,
Kathy?
basically
Competition.
Oh, well.
I think we're going to get together to talk about the substance
on
of the
Ojai Avenue, the
but I think
auditorium
the
being
first
a real
reason
community.
why
Yeah,
it's
community
built,
multi-purpose
and
room.
whatever.
Yeah, or they could,
And maintain that, the architecture in the front.
Possibly.
That's all important.
they could do a lot
And
with
they can do,
that.
they can, you know, just like the twice sold tables, what we did, we urged the owners to save the front.
Oh,
And as far as, what was going to go on in the interior, it's just a big.
Somebody says this space is that, so.
I think that
Because
is
that
neat.
historically,
They actually
That building is